Hello, and thank you for listening to Renewables, a podcast by BioStar, which aims to explore the current and future energy landscape in America.
Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome back to Renewables. We are very excited to have Dr. Jerry Hatfield on our episode this week. And for our viewers and listeners who have been staying tuned, we really appreciate you. Thank you for listening and tuning in every week. And as you know, this is part 4 of our 4-part series featuring our organic fertilizer business and our renewable natural gas business. And great episode last week with Alan Philo from the BioStar team. We really dug into our patented SuperSix organic fertilizer product. And we are very happy to have Alan back this week. Out of necessity, really, because we're going to get in the weeds on soil health today, and wanted to bring Alan on as a co-moderator so that when Dr. Hatfield here starts getting too down in the weeds and goes above my pay grade, Alan will be able to step in and help. So, Dr. Hatfield, thank you so much for joining the show this week. It's really a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you. And it's my pleasure to be here as well. So,
excellent. Well, Dr. Hatfield is a retired USDA Agricultural Research Service plant physiologist. And tell our viewers and listeners, just to get started, a little bit about your career and your background and your expertise to sort of set the stage before we dive into soil health and why it's so important.
Yeah, I retired from USDA in last January of 2020. That's after a 45-year career. 36 of it was with USDA. I had 8 years with the University of California at Davis. My PhD is actually in agricultural climatology with a minor in statistics. And so I've spent a lot of time looking at the soil plant atmosphere continuum. And over the past 30 years, from 1989 through 2020, I was the laboratory director for the National Soil Tilth Lab until we renamed it the National Lab for Ag and the Environment in 2009. But the interest in all of this is really of how do we improve crop production efficiency? How do we begin to look at this whole continuum that we call the soil plant atmosphere system? And so obviously, if we want to produce plants, we've got to rely on our soil, but we also have got a weather interaction. We've got genetics in all of this and everything. So it's really a matter of how do we optimize that system so that we can continue to improve, produce the food that we need for sustaining the population around the world.
Absolutely. That's fascinating stuff. I'm really excited to dig into this. And before we kind of have you and perhaps some of Alan kind of set the stage on some soil basics, if you will. We'll start there and then we'll dig in a little deeper, but just start kind of at the highest level. Why is soil health so important beyond what you've just described?
Yeah, if you think about soil health, and I think this is where a lot of people have confusion because they think, well, you talk about human health and now we talk about soil health. But I think if we go back and we think about what do we want soils to do? We want them to provide water for our plants. We want them to provide support for them. We want to supply nutrients. We want to get the optimum productivity out of that plant. So when you think about this relative to the health dynamic, is that when you go to the doctor, I mean, they take blood pressure, they take blood samples, they take all these different things that looks at the functionality of your body. Well, what we're really trying to do in soil health is saying how optimally does that soil function in terms of providing these things like water, nutrients, support, all the different things that we need to grow a plant. And so we start thinking about it from a functionality point of view. I think it becomes a lot clearer as to what we really want in terms of these dynamics.
Sure. Fascinating. So let's jump into the basics. And Alan, please feel free to chime in and guide the conversation with me. But let's kind of start just sort of setting the stage on the basics of soil and soil structure for our listeners before we dive too deep.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. Let's start at the basics and let's begin to look and say, what is soil? Soil is a combination of sand, silt, and clay and organic matter. And we think about, if you go to a beach, it's just all made of sand, we're not going to get much water out of that. We're not going to get much nutrients out of it. I mean, we all play in our sandboxes and our kids play in sandboxes, but in reality, it's hard to grow a plant in there. And so when we think about all of this aspect of soil, what makes it so fascinating and important is that we've added organic material into that. And that organic material allows that sand, silt, and clay to form into clumps that we call aggregates. That's where that's where the water holding capacity, that's where the nutrient cycling capacity all comes from. So, you really look at soil, and it is a very complex system. And we as humans do a lot to manage that. We do a lot to mess it up as well. But, I think we need to understand that all of these things are a balance between what we start with as parent material, because that's where sand, silt, and clay comes from, and what we've done as management to be able to make that soil really what it is today.
And I'm just going to jump in and add to that what we're dealing with is a living system. It's appropriate to talk about soil health because soil is alive. There is a huge amount of biological diversity that occurs in soils, and there's lots of ways that people talk about this. So one way is to think of it, in like weight terms. There is in an acre slice, so that's about a 6-inch, it's like 6 inches down into the soil, right? Because when you're dealing with soil, you're dealing with a three-dimensional medium. We're not just talking about the surface. We're actually talking about going down into the soil. So an acre slice is a acre on the top, but 6 inches deep. And in that acre slice, there are multiple tons of microbes working. And a good way to think about that too is that if you pick up a handful of soil, to give you an idea of both the amount that's in there and the diversity, there are more species of microbes in the handful of soil that you pick up than there are people in the world.
Wow.
So, yeah, right. So it is a living medium, and it is a living medium that sort of confounds quantification or taxonomical identification. And what you're doing with that is that living part of the soil is actually what is taking those components that Jory was talking about, the sand, silt, and the clay, and it is actively working together with the organic matter to form those soil aggregates and to develop the structure that we consider, as Jory was saying, to be a functional soil structure. And that structure actually has a volumetric ratio to it. And what's fascinating about this volumetric ratio is anywhere you go in the world, any soil that is functional will have the same volumetric ratio. And it's because it's being established by the microbes. And that ratio is that by volume, soil should be 50% basically like physical matter, right? The sand, silt, the clay, the organic matter, 25% water, and 25% air, right? So that when we're talking about a functional soil is structured into those volumetric ratios, and that is done by the living biology in the soil. And I think, Jerry, can you talk about how that's like water infiltration becomes such a great way of looking at that volumetric ratio and the functional aspect of soil health?
Yeah, if you come back and look at that, and I would amplify one piece that Alan made relative to uh, this acre slice, is that 1 acre 6 inches deep is roughly 2 million pounds. And so, we're not talking about a small weight here.
Right.
We're talking about a lot of tons going on. And if you look at this, when we really look at the dynamics of soil and all of this, is that water and air are two of the critical things. They're necessary for life. And when I talk to people about how we improve soil health, the first step on that is biology. And what does biology want? It wants to be fed, it wants water, it wants air, and it wants shelter. Basically, it doesn't like to be disturbed. And so when you think about this, this water infiltration is really how do we get that water into that soil? And because if we don't get it into the soil, what happens to it? It runs off and it gets in streams nearby and everything else. So it doesn't have any value for it. Same time, those same aggregates, when they're allowing water infiltration, are allowing gas infiltration because we are a biological system, we rely on oxygen. And so we need to get that oxygen back and forth in that soil profile as well. So this balance between solid material, water, and air are all part and necessary for the life that we have both within that soil and the life that we have above that soil in terms of growing plants.
Makes sense, and I enjoy spending time with you all because I always learn something. But really, you did a great job of sort of laying out the basics there, and thank you for that. And so, as we kind of transition into farming, which of course we're going to talk about today, and is of course important and an important part of our business. And for our viewers and listeners who maybe missed John Martin's episode, a couple episodes back, we sort of tell the origin story of BioStar Renewables. And John also does a really interesting, pretty high level and quick summary of fertilizer and farming and how traditional fertilizers have impacted farming and soil health over the many decades. And so, Jerry, touch on that, how farming affects soils positively or negatively, and sort of as a farmer, what do you have to be paying attention to and focused on to make sure that you have a healthy environment to grow crops?
Yeah, let's go back a little bit and just talk about this whole dynamic of soil health, but think about those aggregates that are formed because we take biological products, microbial products, and that forms the glue that allows that sand, silt, and clay to come together. And so when we think about this, our whole goal in agriculture, we think about soil improvement, is to get as much carbon into that soil as possible, because that carbon is really in the form of glucose, it's in the form of sugars, it's in the form of all the different things. And just think about what we want to do is that we want to feed that system underneath that. Well, that carbon is our energy source. And we think about that carbon and the energy source in there. Farming from one standpoint is really about how we grow crops that put that carbon into that soil that allows all of this to change. And what we see in reality is that those changes occur very rapidly. You can take a moderately sandy soil, begin to grow that, and you begin to see a color change near the surface as we add organic matter. And so we often think about soil forming processes of being decade-long processes, but these microbial systems are working quite rapidly. So you think about what farming does, in addition to putting carbon into that soil. The other thing that it does when we begin to put that plant on there is that we're taking and protecting that surface from raindrop energy. That rain hits the leaf first, and then it slowly moves down through that canopy down to the soil, so we can keep that water coming into it. We keep a lot of channels open so that we get that water storage within the profile. You got all those different things that are going on. But the one piece, and this is the negative of agriculture, is that when we till or stir up that soil, is that we begin to release that CO2 or that carbon back into the atmosphere. And so you can think about when we aggressively till that soil, is that there are clouds of CO2 or carbon going back up into the atmosphere. And one of the things that we've seen through our experiments where we've measured soils and we've measured the carbon exchange in crop canopies is that a typical farming system across the Midwest is losing about 1,000 pounds of carbon per acre per year. And so you think about this is that, we're continually degrading our soils by just tilling them. And you can till all the organic matter, and we see that happening a lot of this. So farming is a positive and farming can be a negative. And when we start looking at the balances of what we have, is that our whole goal should be to, as we improve soil health, is how do we make sure that we're putting as much into that soil as possible from the atmosphere, the carbon that we convert into the carbohydrates that we put into the soil that then begins to change all the soil properties along the way. So that farming, just from one aspect of growing plants, does this. And then the better we grow that plant, the more carbon we put into the soil. So it is a pretty interesting cycle that we have in terms of looking at it from January 1 to December 31, what happens on an overall system, and then you go from one season to the next on how do we begin to change that dynamic.
Right. And so obviously our business we're in the business of making an organic fertilizer product, and we'll get into that here in a minute and some of the benefits specifically of our product, but just in general, talk about the importance of fertilization and how that's sort of changed, or approaches or technologies maybe have changed over the decades, and the effect of the fertilization on soils.
Yeah, just come back and think about, we grow, just put it into a human context. We grow, not just because of the carbon we put in there. If we all just ate sugar all the time, we wouldn't be very good. We've got to have nitrogen to build proteins in our body. We've got to have all these other minerals that go in it. Think about that same way in soils. If we want a really healthy plant, it's not just about carbon. You've got nitrogen, you've got phosphorus, you've got potassium. All those things are the macronutrients that we talk about for building all these different blocks of products, but you've got all the other micronutrients that go with it. So in order for us to effectively grow a plant, we've got to have all these other nutrients available to that plant because they get shunted off in all sorts of metabolic forms that are important for us. So fertilization is critical because our ability to grow the plant is determined by how balanced that nutrient and how available that nutrient source is.
Got to eat your greens, right?
You got to eat your greens. You got to make sure all of it's there.
Yeah, not just carbs. It can be easy to eat too many carbs. That's interesting. I appreciate you putting it in the human context too, because that is helpful and it's a good way to think about it. And please, if you had something else, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
What I was going to say is that, we have to realize that life is a balance. You could have too much nitrogen, you could have too much phosphorus, you could have a lot of these things that are too much and become toxic levels. And so when we really think about this management aspect, it's how do we optimize that system for performance.
Sure.
And so it is that balanced diet that we think about. If we all ate too many carbs, what happens, and if you all eat too much protein, what happens. So and the same thing in soils. And I think we need to start thinking about soils from that perspective of how do we make sure that we have that balance so that we're effectively growing that plant.
Well, we're recording this just so our viewers and listeners know, a little fun here. We're recording this the Friday before the Super Bowl, and of course my Chiefs are in the Super Bowl. Sorry, Alan, I don't mean to rub it in, but
I've rooted for the Chiefs ever since I was 8 years old, because I grew up in central Iowa, and you have your choice of teams. So the Chiefs were my team. That was all the way back in the Steve DeBerg, Marty Schottenheimer, Christian Okoye days. So
yeah, those were tougher days. Well, anyways, what I was gonna say was I have a feeling that I might eat too many carbs or drink too many carbs this weekend, and I'll have to get back to that balanced diet next week, starting on Monday. So, anyhow, bad joke, but you mentioned a couple of times, Jerry, nitrogen, and our product, which certainly Alan can speak more about, is a 6% nitrogen product, but talk specifically about nitrogen and the importance of that as it relates to the health of soils.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. Hold on for just a second before we hit the nitrogen, because I want to bring out a couple of things that happen with fertilization in soils, because it's important to kind of get this out there before we talk about nitrogen's effect and what SuperSix is doing. So, the way that Jerry was talking about positives and negatives with farming, and one of the things that happens with farming is that obviously we're departing in a large way from what that soil would be covered with, and the relations between the plants on that soil and the microbes underneath the soil is when we're not messing with it, right? So on a very basic level, you will not find things growing in perfect straight rows, right, if you just walk out onto a prairie or even into a pasture, which is sort of like a modified prairie system. And the relationship that happens out there in the soil between the plants and the microbes in the soil is, and we were talking about the way in which these different things are being, basically carbon dioxide is being taken in by plants and it's being made into sugars, and that's how photosynthesis works, right? That's how we capture that solar energy. But then they're doing all sorts of things with those sugars. They're taking those sugars and they're making their bodies out of them. Plants are a large amount, basically just carbon. And but they're also taking a lot of that and they're pumping it down into their root systems, and they're actually exuding sugars out of the root systems in order to feed the microbes that live in the soil. And the reason they do that is because microbes are amazing little machines. They have, without going too deep into this, they have incredibly flexible genetic structures. And they have the ability to sort of like bring in all sorts of, you think of them as like little computers or little machines being run by computers, they can actually bring in all sorts of different computer programs that allow them to break down and access different nutrients that are in the soil, which plants don't have the ability to do, because in a natural system, there's no fertilizer. What you have is parent material or organic residues, and those things have to be broken down, and then those nutrients made available, and then the plants get a hold of them, but they do that through the intermediary of the microbiology, right? So that is a very different system than what we're doing in a farm field, because in a farm field, we would actually prefer that the plant, instead of transporting so many sugars into the soil to feed the microbes, actually take as many of those sugars as possible and build them into the usable parts of the plant that we want to harvest. And so part of what we do is, the way mineral fertilization works is when you put a mineral fertilizer down, It allows for the plants to have access to the nutrients without the intermediary of feeding the microbiology. Okay, that is the way this industrial, like synthetic fertilization model has operated really for, I'd say, the past 50 to 80 years. With our present form really coming into being just after World War II. So it's actually about a 70-year-old system. There have been some changes along the way, but that's the dynamic that we're operating in. So that's part of what's going on with these fertilizers. So again, to just kind of summarize, we're bypassing this system where the plants feed the microbes make the minerals available, the plants take up the minerals. We are feeding the plant with the minerals directly so the plant can take more of the sugars and put them into yield. That's different, and that's a lead in because that's a little bit different than what we're doing, say with our SuperSix products and sort of with organic fertility in general. So I just wanted to draw that out.
I appreciate it very much. Please, Jerry.
Yeah, I was going to just amplify on Alan's comment in a minute. Is that we think about agriculture, and we don't have a lot of discussion about carbon. We talk about nitrogen, we talk about phosphorus, we talk about all the other nutrients, but in reality, absolutely right. Our whole goal is to figure out how much of carbon we take from the atmosphere, we put it into sugars, we put it into byproducts, and we want to haul it off of that field to be able to do something with it. And so modern agriculture has really short-circuited the idea that we need to even understand the microbiological system within this. It's only been the past few years that we've discovered that, maybe we ought to be paying attention to the microbial system for lots of different reasons. But one is, if we want to increase the resilience of our systems to all the perturbations that are going on in terms of weather variations, all the other pieces, that we need to understand that soil can provide a lot of buffering capacity. And that's really what resilience is a buffering capacity. And so when we begin to improve our soil health, we improve our ability to withstand these shocks, to understand these short-term things that optimize our productivity as well. So people are beginning to understand that it's not just about supplying nutrients. It's really about getting that soil up to really performing at a much more optimum level that allows that plant to even do better.
Have over the years, has the presence of other fertilizers or farming methods, do you see that the soil health has diminished over the years, or speak to that a little bit if you don't mind?
Yeah, I mean, it really a classic example. If you go look at the long-term plots, that the Morrow plots in Illinois and the Sanborn plots in Missouri, where over 100 years of farming, either with continuous corn or rotations and things like that. From the time we started managing those systems, the organic matter has decreased. And it decreased very rapidly at the beginning. So we've taken organic matter out of the soil. We can see that same thing across the Midwest when you go out and you look at the landscape and you find out that the top of those hills is a lot lighter colored than the sides of the hills or even the bottom. So we've taken, visually, we can see that organic matter leaving that. So we've actually made our systems much more dependent on what we put into that by synthetic materials and everything else to be able to produce these crops. So, agriculture is, in my opinion, is a success story. But in reality, we need to think about how we can make it even a more efficient success story as we go forward.
Sure. Yeah, and how to make it as sustainable as possible. And I think that's a good transition into specifically the effects of nitrogen on soil health. Either Alan or Jerry, if you would take that one, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start and Alan can kind of maybe add to this. If you think about the two building blocks that are important for our systems, carbon, nitrogen is all important. And you look at this, it really becomes a carbon nitrogen ratio. If we take a corn stalk out there at the end of the season, that carbon nitrogen ratio is probably about 40-1. And when we put a plant into that system, it's often going to be nitrogen deficient because the microbes that are there are going to require that nitrogen in order to grow. And so we have this competition going on. So if we supply that nitrogen in there, we can kind of short circuit that. But nitrogen is critical because it's the basis of forming proteins, and all of this different cell structure that we have out there. So it is one of the critical elements. That's why it's often considered the most important nutrient to manage in this system. And I think that we need to understand that when we affect nitrogen, just use a simple example. When we take a green leaf and it's really optimized in terms of photosynthetic, but you make that leaf a little bit yellow, we're no longer as efficient in capturing sunlight and converting it into sugar because the chlorophylls are not working the way they're supposed to. So it really is important, and you see this yellowing, and that plant is no longer on the efficient category. And so we always want to make sure that it's green because that's an indication that it's effectively capturing what we want it to capture.
What I would add too is, again, to kind of contrast natural systems like non-human intervened systems with farming systems. There's a really different way in which the nitrogen dynamics work. Nitrogen is an interesting nutrient in that it can take a number of different forms as it travels through the soil and the plant. So when we're talking about natural ways that nitrogen gets into a soil, there's a couple ways that happens. One of them is actually interesting. It's lightning. Lightning causes, you might think of it as like a modified atmospheric Haber-Bosch process. The Haber-Bosch process is the process by which we humans artificially fix nitrogen from the atmosphere into a fertilizer form. Right? There's a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere. In fact, what's the percentage, Jerry?
80%.
Yeah, it's actually one of the largest components of the atmosphere, right?
Wow.
But it's hard to get it out of the form that it's in the atmosphere into the form that's usable for plants. So so lightning will actually change that to a form where it's now ammonium, and it will rain down on the soil surface, and it can be taken up by plants. So that's a natural addition. The other way that it naturally gets in is through legumes. So legumes are like beans, peas, alfalfa, and they actually form, again, this is a microbially mediated process. They actually form an association with a special microbe that creates a nodule on the root, and the plant feeds it sugar, again, and those microbes actually take atmospheric nitrogen and change it into a form that's usable for them. And then when the plant stops feeding them sugar, they die off. So it's a little bit brutal here, but those microbes die off, and then the plant actually utilizes the nitrogen that they've fixed. In a natural system, what happens over time is that nitrogen levels build up to a level in soils and in a natural system where, for the most part, they're just sort of cycling through the system, and you don't have large amounts of nitrogen needing to be applied to the system because it's always cycling. The plants are taking it up as it's decomposing out of plant residue, etc. That's very different from a farming system, because what are we doing with all of those products that the plants are creating is we're removing them from the field, right? And so in order to optimize plant productivity, we have to put nitrogen in some form, or we have to affect nitrogen dynamics where we can get nitrogen to release faster out of the soil system than it regularly would release in a natural system. So that's part of why you have to do nitrogen fertilization in the first place.
Very interesting. Thank you for all of that. Like I said, I always learn something that's fascinating. That nitrogen is the atmosphere is 80% nitrogen. That seems hard to believe. So we've talked a lot about carbon and BioStar as a whole. Our mission as a company is to leave the Earth a more sustainable place than we found it. And so, talk a little bit about how, really, just at a thinking of the bigger picture, how does this all impact climate change and tie in with climate change, and why is soil health such an important part of leaving the Earth more sustainable than we found it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this from a standpoint that the atmospheric CO2, continues to go up, and there's a lot of discussion about carbon sequestration and capturing carbon and putting it back in the soil. Well,
Right.
good soil health is really a function of carbon that goes into that, and we'll talk a little bit about all the different playoffs. But if we want to think about this and not just focus on carbon, but what does carbon do to improve water availability, improve nutrient cycling, all these other things that are associated with this, is we got to start looking at it from a much broader picture. Everybody's fascinated with carbon sequestration, and if you look within a soil, there's very little of that carbon that's really sequestered and in a permanent status. Most of it is really in a very rapid cycling. You look at, we talk about the microbial aspects of this. We're taking sugars out of the plant root, we're putting it into the microbes, we're taking that carbon and we're putting it into the glue that forms those aggregates out there. But as we break it down, that's going to be cycled as well. But over time, as we increase organic matter, we put more carbon in there. But it's not in real static form, and it's very dynamic. But it's those dynamics that make that agricultural system as productive as it is. And so our goal, and you think about sustainability, is to get that carbon in there, because that carbon and increasing that aggregate stability, and then the aggregate stability allows the water to come in and be stored as well. But those microbes are also releasing minerals out of that organic material that's out there. They're working with the clay minerals in terms of releasing some of the nutrients and all of this. So that whole sustainability piece is really a result of getting more and more organic material back into that, but also allowing that biological system to do what it's supposed to do. And that is to create that soil in really an optimum state in terms of productivity.
And so that kind of gets into, we talk about how modern fertilization in a way is sort of like bypassing that system, right? It's actually made it possible for, it has caused soils to degrade in the long term, because we are doing things that are bypassing the way the natural system functions in terms of feeding the minerals directly to the plants, reducing the amount of carbon that the plants are pumping into the soil, right? We've done that, and it's created obvious benefits for humanity, because it's produced us more food. But there's a tipping point where if we continue down that path for too long, we can get to a point where soils cease functioning. And then you also have the fact that there is a certain amount of CO2 as it leaves the soil that is adding to the buildup of CO2 in the atmosphere. So then the question becomes, how can we adjust our practices, right, in agriculture in the other direction with things just as small as fertilizers and how we think about fertilizers and what fertilizers are doing in the soils. And so one of the things that's like going on with the project that we've got with SuperSix is actually, if you look at the total amount of nitrogen that we would typically be applying with SuperSix, it's actually really, really small in comparison with the amount of nitrogen that you would see being applied in a regular cropping system. And the reason for that is because it's not a simple just nitrogen application. It's meant to be part of a much larger system in which we're going back to utilizing things like manures, which have a lot of carbon in them. And what we're really playing with this system, as opposed to bypassing that biological system, is we're actually trying to utilize the biological system. So we're going to put a lot of manures on that have nitrogen in them, but they also have a lot of carbon in them that feeds biology. But what we need to do is speed up the breakdown process of those manures to get the nitrogen to release on the scale we need for the plants. So what we're actually doing with like our fertilizer is putting it in, and it's basically acting as a food source for biology to spur them on to break these manures down. And we're actually, so again, we're utilizing the biological cycle to get nitrogen released during the year. And it's a lot more like the natural cycle, where we're not bypassing the natural cycle by just applying mineral fertilizers. So it's those kinds of practices that allow us to get more carbon back out there into the soil, but also to make sure that the microbes are utilizing that carbon both to create better soil structure, and then hopefully some of it remains in the soil at the end of the year. And then when we do that from year to year, we can both help create better functioning soil, but then we can also create more resilient soil and soils with more carbon in them, because we're allowing that buffer capacity to build up over time.
Very, very fascinating. I think we are coming towards a wrap here. I really, really appreciate both of your all's time today. And for our listeners and viewers, please make sure and go back. As you can tell, Alan is absolutely an expert in this area and in our product. And our previous episode, we talk a lot more specifically about our SuperSix product and some of the benefits of our SuperSix product. Jerry, Dr. Hatfield, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're welcome back anytime, as long as I have Alan here to help translate. You're more than welcome to come on the show, and we really appreciate your time and expertise.
Yeah, just a couple closing comments, David, and that's the fact that when we think about soil health and creating this more dynamic, resilient system, the aspects of that are really that we haven't talked very much about today, is what that means for water storage, what that means for water cycling, what that means for improved plant productivity and resilience that allows the systems really to work the way we want them to work. And so there's a lot of things that we can talk about, and starting it from the standpoint of getting materials into that soil that allows that microbial system really to be jump started. You could almost think about giving, analogy we often use is giving your kids a Mountain Dew just before bed and expecting them to go to sleep. The same thing is occurring within the soil when we start adding these real sugar compounds, is that we're giving them a high energy source that allows them really to get started. But we don't want them to crash. We want them to continue to do their things as well. So there's a lot of pieces of this puzzle that are critical to our understanding of how we really need to be thinking about managing our soils.
Well, we certainly appreciate knowing you, and I know you and Alan collaborate quite a bit, and we really appreciate you coming on the show today. Like I said, you're welcome back anytime. We hope you'll come back and catch up with us perhaps later this year. And Alan, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think that Jerry did a really nice job there, and thanks for coming on, and thanks for having us both on again.
Absolutely. Make sure to go back and check out the 4-part series. This is part 4 of 4. We will be back to more regularly scheduled programming here in the next couple of weeks. We have some really exciting guests who are going to come on and talk about other renewable energy strategies for their corporations and how they're addressing and achieving their net zero goals. So please make sure and give us a follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. Dr. Hatfield, thank you again. Alan, thank you as always. And thanks for tuning in to another episode of Renewables. Have a great weekend.